midnight verses. To experience the true suffocating dread of this tale, follow the ritual. Put your headphones on, close your eyes, and visualize internally the stories of darkness. Dare it to listen. The Surrogate. A father's toxic ambition leads to a horrific accident on the devil's spine. When his son, Leo, falls into a dark ravine, a perfect version appears at the top. The father makes a silent trade, but they knew Leo isn't human, he's a hollow predator fueled by dark oil and his father's guilt. Their shadows are moving.
The Surrogate. Every father is an architect of his child's soul. Some build cathedrals of kindness, others build fortresses of intellect. I built a weapon. I wanted a titan, a boy who didn't just compete but conquered. My son, Leo, was the clay, and I was the sculptor, indifferent to the cracks forming in the material as long as the silhouette looked powerful. Our world was one of gasoline, grit, and the high-pitched scream of motocross engines. To my wife, Elena, the sport was a slow-motion suicide pact. She saw the bruises as warnings. I saw them as badges of rank. I lived by a singular, toxic creed. If you aren't willing to break a bone for your dreams, you don't deserve to win. I told Leo this every morning as he strapped on his chest protector. I didn't realize then that the marrow I was willing to sacrifice would be his, and the nightmare I was building would eventually move into our guest room. Leo was a quiet child, perhaps too quiet. He had eyes like deep, still pools, eyes that reflected my own intensity back at me until I mistook his fear for focus. We spent our weekends on the Devil's Spine, a jagged, sun-scorched ridge miles away from the sanctioned tracks. It was a place of gray dust and ancient, sharp stones that seemed to hunger for the rubber of tires. The day of the accident, the heat was a physical weight. The air tasted of burnt oil and ozone. Leo was hesitant, his small frame trembling atop his bike. He looked at the Great Gap, a terrifying 60-foot jump across a ravine that looked like a jagged scar across the mountain's face. "I don't think I can clear it, Dad," he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of his helmet. "Can't is a word for the weak, Leo," I snapped. I wasn't looking at my son, I was looking at the gap, imagining the glory of him soaring across it. You have the equipment, you have the training. If you have the spine for it, you'll land it. If you don't, well, maybe Elena was right about you. That was the shove. He kicked the bike into gear. I watched him accelerate, the dust pluming behind him like a funeral shroud. He hit the ramp with perfect speed. For a heartbeat, he was a god, suspended against the pale blue sky, a silhouette of triumph. Then the wind shifted. His front tire clipped a jagged rock at the landing lip. The bike didn't just fall, it disintegrated. Leo was hurled forward, his body limp as a rag doll, bouncing twice off the canyon wall before vanishing into the thick, dark shadows of the ravine. The sound followed a second later, a wet, sickening crunch, like a heavy boot stepping on a bag of dry sticks. I scrambled to the edge, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Looking down, the sight was a visceral assault. He lay twisted at an impossible angle, his leg shattered in a way that made the bone look like a splintered white spear poking through his jersey. He wasn't screaming. He was making a low, rhythmic, gurgling sound, the sound of a life leaking out through a broken throat. As I began the frantic descent, a cold, calculated terror seized me. I saw the next 20 years flash before my eyes, the sterile white walls of ICUs, the crushing weight of medical debt, and the permanent wheelchair in the hallway. I saw Elena's face, the way her love for me would curdle into a pure, concentrated hatred that would poison every meal and every silence. I saw my legacy ending in a heap of broken meat at the bottom of a hole. "Let's go home, Dad." The voice was clear. It was calm. It was right behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly fell into the abyss. Standing at the top of the ridge, bathed in the harsh, uncaring sunlight, was Leo. But it wasn't the Leo I had just seen fall. This boy was flawless. His jersey was pristine, not a single speck of the ridge's gray dust on his shoulders. He leaned casually against a brand new bike, one that didn't have a scratch on its chrome. Even his glove had the exact same tiny tear near the thumb that I had noticed that morning. He looked at me with eyes that were a little too dark, a little too steady, like two pieces of polished obsidian. He wore a faint, unsettling smile that didn't quite reach those eyes. I looked back down into the ravine. My real son was still there, a broken heap in the shadows, his gurgling growing faint. The silence between the two Leos was the loudest thing I had ever heard. In that silence, a horrific choice took root. I could choose the tragedy, or I could choose the perfection. I could spend my life tending to a ruin, or I could walk away with this miracle and pretend the accident never happened. "Leo," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I'm ready to go, Dad," the boy said. His voice was a perfect replica, but it lacked the tremor of fear that had been there only minutes before. "I'm better now. I'm exactly what you wanted." I turned my back on the ravine. I didn't look down again. As we rode away, the wind carried a final thin plea from the shadows. Below, a sound that would haunt my dreams until the day I died. "Please don't leave me. I need you, Dad." The first few months were a revelation. The new Leo was the son I had always dreamed of, a biological masterpiece. He was fearless. On the track, he moved with a fluid, terrifying grace, taking turns at speeds that should have flipped the bike. He never complained. He never cried. He was an apex competitor. But within the walls of our home, the mask began to slip. Elena noticed it first. She said he felt hollow. One night, she found him in the garden at midnight. He was standing perfectly still, not a muscle twitching, not even his eyelids moving. He was staring at a large garden spider in its web. When Elena called his name, he didn't turn his head. He simply reached out with lightning speed, snatched the spider, and swallowed it whole. He turned to her then, his face illuminated by the porch light, and gave her that practiced, empty smile. "Just protein, Mom," he had said. Then came the mirror. He began spending hours locked in the bathroom. If I listened at the door, I wouldn't hear water running. I would hear a low, rhythmic clicking sound. One day, the door was cracked, and I saw him. He was standing an inch from the glass, staring at his own reflection. He was using his fingers to pull his mouth into different shapes, a smile, a frown, a look of surprise, as if he were a puppeteer practicing with a new marionette. The dread reached a fever pitch when I found him in the garage. He was sitting on the floor with a shard of jagged glass. He had sliced a long, deep opening in his thigh. But he wasn't bleeding red. A dark, viscous, oily fluid was oozing from the wound. He wasn't in pain. He was peering into the opening with a clinical, detached interest. "Leo, what are you doing?" I gasped, the air leaving my lungs. He looked up, his obsidian eyes reflecting the overhead fluorescent lights. "Just checking the wiring, Dad," he whispered, "making sure the machine you built is still running hot." He began to use the voice. Whenever I showed hesitation, whenever I looked at him with the naked terror I was beginning to feel, he would lean in close. His voice would shift, losing its strength, dropping into that exact, agonizing wet pitch of the boy at the bottom of the ridge. "Please don't leave me. I need you, Dad." It wasn't a plea. It was a threat. He was reminding me of the price I had paid. He was reminding me that I was an accomplice to a murder. The end came the night before the regional championship. Leo was the favorite to win, a local phenomenon. But I couldn't bear to be in the same zip code as him anymore. The house felt cold, even in July. The air felt thin. I found him in his room, staring out the window at the moonlit hills. "We're not going tomorrow," I said, my voice cracking. "We're done. I'm taking you somewhere. I don't know where, but you aren't my son. I'm calling the authorities. I'll tell them everything. I'll go to jail. I don't care." The boy didn't turn around. "Please don't leave me," he started, his voice already shifting into that haunting, gurgling rasp. "I need you. Stop it," I screamed, lunging for him. I wanted to wrap my hands around that perfect neck and squeeze until the oil stopped flowing. I wanted to destroy the miracle I had brought home. But he didn't flinch. Before I could touch him, he moved. It wasn't a human movement, it was a blur of shadows. He caught my throat with a hand that felt like cold, industrial iron. He was only 12, but his strength was absolute, an immovable force. He lifted me off the ground as if I weighed nothing. "Until what, Dad?" he asked. His voice was no longer a replica of Leo's. It was a hollow, booming drone that seemed to vibrate in my very marrow. "Are you going to discard me? Are you going to leave me in a hole like you did to him? You wanted the best. You wanted the Titan. You prayed for a son who couldn't be broken." His grip tightened, cutting off my air. My vision began to swim with dark spots. "You didn't replace him to save your family," the thing whispered, leaning its face inches from mine. Its skin felt like cold wax. "You replaced him to save your ego. You invited me in because you were too weak to carry the weight of your own failure." As the world faded to black, I realized the final cruel irony of my ambition. I hadn't raised a champion. I had invited a predator into the nest, a creature that had been waiting in that ravine for a father cold enough to make a trade. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was the boy's smile, a perfect, practiced, terrifyingly hollow smile. "Abandon one son, and you're a failure. Abandon two, and you're just the prey."
We treat people as tools for our glory at the cost of our humanity. When you choose the perfect lie over the broken truth, you don't just lose your soul, you become the prey. The shadows have settled. Dare to remember. If you felt the cold breath of the darkness today, leave a like to keep the candles burning. Comment with the moment that made your skin crawl. And subscribe to join our circle of listeners. There are 50 more stories waiting in the dark. Good night. If you can sleep.